Yes, indeed, in the past 5 weeks, the department invested a great deal of money. Yes, a great deal of money to say it's high time that we share with the South Africans the nature of the work that the department is doing. Between then and now, we have managed to facilitate a series of programs ranging from rail, aviation, and today we're doing one of the very, very important programs, and it is the last. It is called Public Transport System. Public transport. Guess what? I brought you Umekibi Manana. She is the Chief Director in the Public Transport Network Development in the department. She has the black belt. Let me whisper, she's not hearing me. She has a black belt in all what you want to know about the public transport system in South Africa. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get Mekibi to greet the listeners, and then from there, we will bring you an insight by Dr. Blade Nzimande. Last week, Dr. Blade Nzimande was launching a very, very important campaign. A campaign called Festive Season Road Safety Campaign. I'm sure we know the significance of that campaign. Immediately after Mekibi has greeted you, we will just jump straight into the insert just to set the tone. Mekibi, greet the listeners.
Good afternoon to all the listeners, and I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. I'm sure listeners are excited. Let me reveal the secret. As we're coming in the studio tonight with Mekibi, she was asking me, you 1 hour, do you think I have enough content to keep the listeners glued on their television and on their radios? Because 1 hour is too much. I told her that, you know what, you'll be the first one to complain that this hour was too little. He is going to join me right now, and he's going to complain after this broadcast that indeed 1 hour is too little. Without wasting any of your time, dear listeners, last week in Mutimolo in Limpopo, Dr. Blade Nzimande launched this very, very important campaign. And he made us believe that there's a study that was conducted across the globe. The study suggests most of the untimely deaths are caused by road accidents in the brackets between 4 and 34 years old. I mean, really? The majority of the deaths now are caused by accidents. Now, let me just give you this insert by Dr. Blade Nzimande. Listen.
Road crashes are the leading cause of death in people aged between 5 and 34 years worldwide. It is also the leading cause of death globally for children and young people aged between 10 to 24 years. And the third leading cause of death globally, among people aged between 30 to 44 years. So here we are talking about what is happening, in fact, for want of a better term, a slaughter of the under 50, which is the future of our country, especially those who are younger than 35 years old. 1,676 people died on our roads for the period December 1, 2017 to January 15, 2018. Worldwide, every 6 seconds, someone is on the world road. So we have a big challenge.
I'm not sure where to begin.
Right.
I'm really not sure where to begin. Those statistics are saying something to us. They are giving us a signal. They are telling us what not to do. I will allow you to ponder over those statistics, because I know very, very soon together with Mekibi, we will be talking about these statistics. How best we can undo these untimely and unnecessary deaths on our roads. But before we do that, let's ask Mekibi. Me, tell us exactly what is it that you do in the Department of Transport in as far as tonight's topic is concerned.
Thank you, sir. I think, as you indicated earlier on, that I come from the National Department of Transport, from the Public Transport Branch within the National Department of Transport. What we do, basically, public transport is about, it's really the mode of transport that's focusing on people. And particularly here, we refer to people as passengers. Effectively, people shouldn't need cars to be moved from point A to point B. That's why public transport then plays a role. It's an important role that it plays in making sure that people or passengers get to workplaces, get to hospitals, get to schools, get to recreational centers, and also use public transport for running their errands. In South Africa, public transport takes the form of taxis, rail, and buses, and we refer to those three as land-based public transport. Now, another element that also contributes to public transport is non-motorized transport, because people have to move from their houses to a station or to a point where they're able to get public transport. And non-motorized transport then involves walking, where people walk from home to a station or to a bus stop. And also in South Africa, what we've seen now emerging is the use of what we call tuk-tuks, where they move people from, the last mile connection, from either home to the station, or when you basically alight at the bus stop or the station and you want to move to your workplace, then the tuk-tuk then plays that role of providing that last mile connection. Public transport is an important mode of transport because it's considered as a low carbon mode. It shouldn't be emitting emissions like your private vehicles or private cars would do. And so our aim in public transport is to get people, as many people as possible, from their private cars into public transport, basically into trains, into buses, and into taxis as well. And we recognize that for us to get people from their private cars, we need to provide a public transport service that is of a high quality, that will attract them and make it convenient for them to move, rather than just focusing and depending on their public transport, on their private cars. And the reason why we also promote public transport is because it doesn't lead to congestion. Just think of people in their cars on a road. You're all blocked and you're all waiting to use the road. So, with public transport, it is easier. The way that it should be is that public transport in any form of road must be prioritized over private transport, so that then people who are in a public transport, a vehicle, can get to their workplaces or to school much faster than people who are in their private cars.
Well, that was very great. Born again. At this point, let us tell our listeners that should they have anything that they want to engage you around, make inputs about the public transport in South Africa, this is the time. I'm sure maybe they've been trying to get through an official in the Department of Transport to talk or to engage around the matters of public transport in South Africa. Perhaps this is their time. Our number to call, Mfunda will take your number if you are using your mobile phone, and he will call you back, is 0800 314 446. The number again for you caller, you want to call and contribute in tonight's program, the number to call, Mfunda will take your phone or you take your number, is 0800 314 446. Now, Mekibi, I don't know, the minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande, when he was talking here, he made references to what is happening across the globe. Now you are given an opportunity to talk to the people who might be here from all over South Africa and from all over the world. If you are to say something, the significance, the importance, what is it if we are to contrast without mentioning any other country? If we are to contrast our public transport system in South Africa, what is it that you will say to these tourists that are listening to this program? What would you say to the South Africans? Because at times people complain because they don't have anything to compare with. If you've never been elsewhere, you will always complain that the public transport in South Africa is so bad because you've never been elsewhere, where at times it's non-existent. It is not there. You don't have your car, you cannot travel. Now you are to tell South Africans, and probably whoever is here from any country, what would you put there as the significance or as something that you would say would fall within the first 10 compared to the world in terms of our transport system in South Africa?
Thank you. I must just indicate that in countries like Europe, even though people may have resources to actually access or buy a private car, they prefer to use public transport. And I think it is because, to a large extent, the mode of public transport has been promoted to people at a very low, or rather as kids. So they grow up depending on the use of public transport. And it is almost like it is their first choice of mode. And whereas in South Africa, it's a complete opposite, because people are stranded in the sense that they don't have choice. Public transport is the only mode that they have, or walking is the only livelihood mode that they have from getting from point A to point B. And I think as a country, we are privileged in the sense that even though people don't have resources to, or all of us can afford to buy a vehicle or a private car, that gives us an opportunity as South Africa to make sure that we get it right from the beginning, where we use that opportunity that public transport presents to make sure that it is the only mode of choice for people. And in comparatively to other developing countries, it's the same situation where, for example, to a large extent, public transport is not fully developed, like it is in most developed countries, like in Europe or in the Americas. And so what we are saying, for example, in India, they have the emerging informal sector, like the taxi industry, that basically is taking center stage in providing public transport services. And we are also privileged as a country that we have a similar sector, the taxi industry, that was effectively started by Black people or Africans in South Africa, and it is a growing industry. So it is important that we embrace some of those opportunities that have come through and make sure that we continue to build on that and build on promoting public transport in South Africa. There are other countries like your Latin American countries, Brazil, Bogota, which also have a similar profile as South Africa, where public transport also plays a role with, especially where the informal sector has contributed largely to the growth of public transport. And I think we look to them as South Africa to see what lessons we can learn from such countries as well as India, to see how we can even partner where possible for them to pass knowledge and the lessons that they've learned in helping us improve our public transport system. And the critical thing that I should also mention is in most of the European countries as well as your Latin American countries, public transport is provided at the most local level, at the municipal level. And in South Africa, we have the same as well. Public transport in South Africa is a concurrent function, therefore, which means it is shared at national, provincial, as well as local level. And going forward, it is important that we build capacity at municipal level to be able, for municipalities to be able to embrace this function, not only just in terms of planning, but making sure that they provide services that will make a difference in people's lives.
Talking about people's lives, yes, indeed, South Africa has its own cultural goal, better life for all. We will talk about that later. We've been receiving messages. I'm sure you are noticing me fiddling with my gadgets here. A couple of stations are saying they've been breakings. The transmission is breaking at intervals. We are not sure what is going on, but we definitely sure Mfundo is going to resolve this. All what we can say at this point in time, I'm sure this is happening for the last time. Last week, we had almost a similar challenge. There were gaps and the breaks in between, and stations have been complaining. I want to make this public announcement to the stations out there. This is not going to happen again. Government is going to invest in its own platform, in its own satellite platform. We cannot afford to pay a great deal of money to service providers, and we experience these breaks at intervals, because this does harmful, it creates problems to the stations, because you will have a listener from station A who was listening to this program. Because we keep on breaking, they migrate, they tune into another station. They might not go back to that station. Yes, I've said it. My name is Lennox Glass. We are broadcasting on behalf of the Department of Transport. Yes, again, they've invested a lot of money in this program. So it is definitely not correct when a service provider is not coming to the party. We are expecting to have a flowing program from 6:05 to 7:05. When our colleagues, the stations, are going to be complaining that we are breaking at intervals, it can't be right. It can't be right. This is what I wanted to say. Okay, now that I vented out, now, Mekibi, tell us. You see, you spoke about the better life, and I was carried away talking about the cultural goals, where South Africa is saying we're striving for a society where there's a better life for all. You see, our president and all the previous presidents, they've identified about 3 critical areas that need to be addressed in South Africa. One of those is unemployment in South Africa. Unemployment. Now, one of the key objectives of these programs by the Department of Transport was also to highlight to the public out there the opportunities found in the department, the careers that people might find here, the bursaries, if there are any, that are being offered by various strands of the department. Today we're discussing public transport. What do you think would consider careers found in the public transport?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klaas. As explained, public transport, we've got 3 major categories, I would say, 4 work streams. You have the work stream around planning, and then the second work stream would be infrastructure, and the third one would be operations. Now, in terms of planning, I indicated earlier on that public transport is a function that is shared across national, provincial, as well as municipal spheres. So at municipal sphere, they are responsible for planning public transport because that's where service delivery happens. And so within that work stream of planning, you have careers such as transport planning, you have careers such as network planning, because for you to be able to offer an integrated public transport system, it has to work in an integrated way and in a network approach. And so you would then need somebody who would then look at buses, taxis, as well as rail, and see how they all complement each other and are integrated so that there's a seamless movement of people. And so you also have project managers, because if you are going to be delivering on major infrastructure projects like we are doing in public transport, like your rail services, then you need a project manager. You have transport economists. Now, with transport economists, you have to understand, for example, your demand and your supply in terms of services that are offered. So that's why you need somebody who then understands economics. Then you also have your, geographical information system type of careers, where, for example, if you're going to be putting together a network plan at municipal level, and within this plan, it must then show a map of how the city looks like, and therefore you then need your geographical information system specialist. Now that is at the one level of planning. And coming to infrastructure in public transport is largely around roads. Now, for example, all careers in roads would then also play a role in public transport. For example, in roads, you need civil engineers who are critical in building of roads. You need road traffic engineers. If we're going to have traffic systems operating on our roads, or even in our public transport corridors, we need people with traffic signaling skills. Then you also need, I've already spoken about civil engineers. Then you also need structural engineers. For example, if you're going to put up in roads, normally with big bridges, you need a structural engineer. Now, with us in public transport, if we're going to be putting up depots, we're going to be putting up stations, we will need a structural engineer. And even other built environment related professions, they also play an important role in public transport. For example, if you're going to put up a station, you need an architect to design that station. You will need an electrical engineer to look at the electrics. So they complement each other. So whatever happens in roads, all the careers that are in roads would also contribute to public transport.
Mekibi, that was a mouthful. Tell me, let us share with the listeners this. With all these professions that we are putting it out there, are you saying without those, the department cannot function? If no is your answer, what is it that you are doing as a department to make sure that we have an abundance of these professions that you're talking about?
Okay. These areas that I've just highlighted are important in the proper functioning of any transport system. And to a large extent, you may find that certain professions are needed at municipal level and not necessarily at a national level. And that depends largely on the role that we do as a National Department of Transport. As a National Department of Transport, largely we're responsible for policy formulation, for legislation, for regulations, for setting standards, for setting guidelines that then are implemented either at a provincial level or at a municipal level. So at our level, largely we would then need people who are policy developers or strategists, and people who are able to develop legislation, because they will need to assist us in developing acts and regulations. And then at a provincial level, they need a different type of people or skills, largely, to implement the policies and the legislation that we have developed. And so most of those careers that I just highlighted would then play a role, like your engineers at a network planning stream, as well as infrastructure provisions and operations, are all at a municipal level. Now, as a department, we've basically undertaken a skills audit for the transport sector, because we've realized that it is important that we fully embrace all the new emerging innovations and emerging technologies, to make sure that as a sector that we are relevant and we're able to respond to all those emerging opportunities. So we have undertaken a skills audit, and out of that we've identified careers that we need to be investing in, or rather what we call pivotal and skills that are really in shortage. And so we work closely with the Transport Education and Training Authority, TITA, that basically looks at how we can then make sure that we build capacity and we build skills in all those areas that are needed within the public transport sector, as well as transport as a whole. The department as well offers bursaries. We've got memorandum of understanding with different universities, all major universities across South Africa, where in the MOU we identify areas of cooperation, and we then transfer money to the university. And in those areas where we've identified that these are pivotal skills that we need, or scarce skills that we need, that university will then make sure that bursaries are then given to cover those shortages of skills. And so people can access these by going to the Transport Education and Training Authority, because TITA as well, under the Department of Higher Education and Training, offer bursaries within the transport sector. And they can also come to the department, to phone the helpline or the presidential helpline, where then they can be directed to the right people to give them bursaries.
That was a mouthful. I told you, listeners, she has a black belt in the public transport system. And earlier on, Siswam, you spoke about the taxes. And much as I'm avoiding this subject, but because you raised it, I'm going to talk about it. At this point, let me remind the listeners just to tune to a special broadcast brought to you by the Department of Transport, and tonight we're discussing public transport system. Yes, indeed, it is the last, and we are told there are problems in terms of transmission. We invite even the station managers, if they have an opportunity, to call on 0800 314 446, just to express how they feel about the quality of the program tonight. It's very, very important. 0800 314 446. Mewaka, earlier on, you spoke about how, I don't want to say, there's an saturation of the taxis in South Africa. But comparatively speaking, the taxis, like minibus taxis, there's so many. And it's not bad. It's not something bad. It means people have so much transport. Now, they've been complaining that everyone else in the public sector or in the public transport system are being subsidized. And at times they even say, even the private cars, if you work for the government will subsidize your car. I'm not sure who told them that. They're saying you will get a car scheme where government will pay a portion of that amount as long as that car is used for work related. Now they want to say why, or they're asking why this discrimination. To have ready-made answers as to why minibuses or taxis are not subsidized?
Thank you, Mr. Lennox. I think there's a history to the reason why minibus taxis have not been subsidized in South Africa. To a large extent, most of the modes that have received subsidies in South Africa, it's been largely because of contracts that were entered into. For example, with bus contracts, in the past, government decided that, and also in a way of trying to formalize the industry, because taxis were never part of the formal arrangement within South Africa. They were seen as an informal industry. So buses were seen largely as part of the formal arrangement, and so they were subsidized through the public transport operations grant. But going forward, there is a recognition that, taxis transport more than 65% of passengers in South Africa. So they, and to a large extent, they provide a convenient service to passengers. For example, in some of the townships where you have informal settlements emerging, taxis would be the first mode of transport that reaches, that are able to take people from their homes to their workplaces. So there is that recognition that they play a very important role in South Africa. And so as a department, we are currently busy developing the public transport strategy, public transport subsidy policy and strategy. And within that, we basically want to look at how do we subsidize users. Because I think it is important that we emphasize that it is not about subsidizing the mode. It is about subsidizing the user, so that the user, when a passenger gets that form of a subsidy, they know that, you know what, I want to use rail, or I want to use buses, or I want to use taxis. So they are empowered to be able to, to choose whichever mode they want to use. So that
Mekibi, let me not disturb you. Just hold that thought. I'm told there's someone on the line. The name is Karabo. Karabo, you're on air.
Thank you so much for taking my call, Lennox. Very quickly, I'm going to ask you a question, and I wonder if I can update you in terms of the technical problem that we're experiencing as well.
Please update the listeners, please.
All right. Number one, let's start with a question for the guest, and thank you so much for having coming into the studio. Here's a question about the taxis, and it's something that the minister spoke about when we were at the event. The minister spoke that the department is looking at moving goods and people to rail. Now, I just want to find out how far is the department in terms of putting that into effect. Are they ready to invest in the rail system? For instance, something like a Gau train between Pretoria and Limpopo, Pretoria and Eastern Cape, and so forth. That's my question. Now, here's the update for the listeners that are listening. I've been in touch with our service providers, which is the Media Connection, and just to try and find out what the problem is. The Media Connection has confirmed that they're not having any problem from their side. Eventually, I managed to get a hold of ICASA. I managed to get a hold of Centec. Centec has confirmed that they're experiencing a problem from their side. So at the moment, CCIS as well as the Media Connection, there's very little that we can do. We are relying on Centec to sort the problem out, and they have reassured me that they will get to it as soon as possible. And I'm monitoring it on my side as well, and we really apologize for the technical glitches.
Thank you very much, Karabo. Immediately, Karabo, I don't know, you provoke Lydia from Maikeng. Lydia, you are on air.
How are you, my brother?
I'm very fine. How are you?
No, me, I'm blessed in the name of Jesus.
Amen.
Here in Northwest, especially in Maxine, I'm listening from Mama to FM. So it's like, we need to hear what are you talking about, because it's very important even for us, especially when we talk about public transport, because now we don't hear you at all. You just talk. The time when you talk, then the time you want to talk, the real message that you want to hear cut off. So I just wish that we must repeat it again, because we don't hear anything from Nabato FM. Just cut, things like that.
Thank you very much, my sister. Obviously, we are going to make sure that we do repeat this program. If this is the sentiment across the country, we are going to talk to Centec. We are going to talk to all the service providers, including the client. We will make sure that we do this thing again. Okay, let's go to Klersdorp. Tsepo has something to say. Tsepo, you're on air. Ndad. Umunati ujo ndate.
Re teng le kae ntate? Okay.
Ndate Tsebo, re a kopa hle ne kopa hore do you have, can you speak loud? We were having serious problem. We don't know whether it is this technical problem that we're talking about, but can you please speak into the mouthpiece? Me Kibi would like to hear what you're saying.
Okay. Batho bana ba di taxi ngata bana ba tla ha di tsena di taxi bangwe go di taxi di a tete fiwa tete se do fa tšhelete for taxi ga go o busa taxi ya go tete fiwa se do fa tšhelete mo ntong ya teng e le tsala go ya go fokotsa bongata ba di taxi mo tseleng. So puso o se teng e tse ka yone ga ke gore go fokotsa pitlagano ya di transport tse ngata mo tseleng. Ke bua gape ke dira teng tsa karabo mona go tse ngata ba le problem ya selo ka tse ngata le ditrena go ne yana ke tsama ka matsatsi o le ne se ka mo tse go gauteng di song le ke ya o le on Monday and Tuesday. So now trena e ya batho passenger train e ne tsama continually about why puso e sa kgone go ka busetsa trena e o ka matsatsi le matsatsi batho ba kgone go dirisa go fokotsa kgwebelano ya selo ya dintho mo tseleng ya di taxi mo tseleng go boela ga di go ditrene di kgone go sebedisiwa gape wa ipuso e sa gotlhetse mogolo wa ditrena one ke bua gape le mokgwa wa dibese dibese mo tseleng mona tsela tsa gore di phuthagadi dibese di ngata ga dibese di nnyane mo tseleng. So puso wa e sa kgone go sa tudaisa batho ba dibese gore dibese di be di ngata di kgone go fokotsega gore kgwebelano e ntsi e leng teng mo ditseleng e kgone go fokotsega.
Okay, Ndate Tsebo. Yeah. Thank you, Ndate Tsebo. We're very sorry, man, Ndate Tsebo, that the line is so bad, and the more you engage us and something that you want to hear, the more the line is compromised. Maybe at that point or at this point, let's go to Jeffrey in Atteridgeville. Jeff, you're on air.
Hello.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm fine, and how are you, Mr. Leonard?
Fine, sir. You're on air.
Just two questions. Yamatomo, the Department of Transport, there is any way come question or maybe better review the requirement that our issue in licenses, maybe like, for example, before you get the license, you have driving maybe a driver a maybe you have to have maybe like an activity without channel. And then second question I got here about the truck. I tell them what the driver during the day sometimes even the cause of the accident. What is maybe like Department of Transport that is the habit? Maybe like the truck but the driver maybe at night without channel because of most of the time the one I'm motivating the truck or sometimes no trafficking to grab the truck more things. I had a problem to travel like Amastrala, and then I maybe get in an accident because of that truck. I think maybe like the driver at night, maybe to make more coverage and the accident. So that's
Ribokile Ndate Jeff. Thank you to Peli, because I can tell you are listening to Peli FM.
Yes.
Thank you. Now let's listen to our expert. We have Kibi here. Unali black belt. Utadi solver kaufela diputso tse man. Kaufela and abe aufe ambush, aufe parcela. Nekibi.
Okay, thank you to the listeners for the questions. There was a question that was asked around the department's strategy to move goods from road to rail. I think I should explain that largely that strategy focuses on goods rather than passengers. But we do recognize that in public transport, for example, rail is the backbone of any public transport system. And you don't find that only in South Africa, you find that internationally everywhere, because it is a mass mover. The number of people that you're able to move on rail, you can never ever be able to move, for example, even on the biggest bus you may have. So in the work that we do with municipalities, we always say to them, it is important that when you plan your system, you make sure that rail becomes your backbone, and then your buses and your taxis play the role of a feeder or a feeding services into rail.
Get people into the rail,
yes,
into the trains.
Yes. And so so largely that is how we view rail. And then there was a question on I think I answered two ones already on the rail and the buses. And then there was a question on the conditions for issuing, I think it was driver's license or operating licenses.
Yeah, metric and all that stuff.
Yes. Okay. So currently, if you want to be a public transport operator, whether it be on buses or taxis, you need two types of licenses. You need a driver's license, like anybody who's going to be driving a private vehicle. But secondly, you also need an operating license. Now, the operating license, for you to get one, there will be a number of conditions that are set for you to be able to get the license. So, for example, with operating licenses, they will check your criminal record, whether you've got a history, or not. And then there may be also other, whether you've got insurance, PDP, what they call public insurance. If you are going to be transporting people, you should be able to have an insurance to cover those people. So there are other conditions that are set. So we just don't issue an operating license willy-nilly. A person would have to then satisfy certain conditions. It's an onerous process. It's not just an easy process that then is done at a provincial level and as well in our provincial regulatory entities. So it's not easy for you to just get an operating license. So basically that's that. Then on the road freight matter about trucks, I think that it is an ongoing issue that the department looks into making sure that we make our roads safe, and also we look into ways of managing trucks that are coming into the city, and I think those measures are still being implemented, where, for example, a truck has to, if it's going to be coming into a city, they need to stop. There are certain stopping places that they need to pass at, so that they can then be checked in terms of law enforcement. Officers will check the weight of the goods that are being carried and whether people or truckers are complying with the law and other requirements in terms of their licenses. So I think it's an ongoing issue that as a department we are committed to.
Yeah, there's been a great deal of outcry really involving the trucks, to the point that some people have been suggesting, can't we have dedicated lines for the trucks? Because at times it has nothing to do with the unroadworthiness or unroadworthiness of the trucks. At times they get to be so impatient, and it takes time. The braking or the stopping distance of the truck is never going to be the same as a private car. By the time they realize that there's a problem in front, they are already there. And you see, it is never a truck and a car. It's a truck and a series of these cars because of the impact and the weight and the size. So people have been asking about these dedicated lanes. I'm sure it's a subject of the discussion for another day. Lydia, I know Lydia felt it was a very critical program, particularly for people in the rural areas. Now, on behalf of Lydia, let me ask this question. What are we doing as the department to make sure that if we're not biased in favor of the people in the rural areas in terms of the public transport, what is it that we're doing? Because people over there are complaining about the lack of the public transport. People will tell you, we wait for over 5-6 hours if we need to go to town or to go to the clinic or doctor, because there's only one, and it's the van of Ubaba Mfundisi that is doubling up as a transport. And they are alluding, or they are saying this is happening because the road infrastructure leading into their villages, and no car can survive those conditions of the roads. Now, we're talking about the road infrastructure, we're talking about the transport. Is there a link? Is there something that we can do at least to make sure that the people in the rural areas do benefit, like the people in Soweto or the people in Sandton, that they can jump into the Gautrain and go somewhere?
There's a lot of programs that the department is currently running. For example, on roads, we have a grant called the PMRG grant, and that grant largely is a provincial roads grant where money is given to provinces to look into road infrastructure, whether it be rehabilitation or building of roads. And so the department does not only just look at, we're only looking at rural public transport, for example. Yes, roads are critical because without any road, then you will not even be able, a person will not even be able to walk, or you will not even have any taxi being able to go to any rural area. And so that is the starting point to make sure that there is road infrastructure in place. And when that has happened, then the department then comes in and similar to the program that we have in your urban centers, where we're looking at integrated public transport networks, the department is also looking into integrated public transport networks in the rural districts. And as a department, remember that our role largely is to develop policy and strategy and to then coordinate implementation at provincial level or at municipal level. And so we have a rural transport strategy that is looking into piloting integrated public transport networks in rural areas. There have been district municipalities that have been identified in piloting these services. And some of the services really, as you rightfully said, would look, for example, at promotion of non-motorized transport, where we promote the distribution of bicycles through provinces within rural areas, and those bicycles are given to scholars so that they're able to go to school. And we work closely with provinces in distributing bicycles in rural areas. And then secondly, you would then look at a coordinated service where it's a periodic service, for example, bearing in mind that rural areas are different. You've got those that are your small towns, and then you've got those that are like your deep rural areas. And in your small towns, then the service that you offer will be different, and that's where your periodic services will also come into being, where maybe every 30 minutes you may offer a service that moves people from point A to point B. And in your deep rural areas, then the type of service that is offered, it will depend on the type of vehicle as well, whether the infrastructure is there or not. But largely what we have found in rural areas is that the two most biggest modes of transport there are your buses as well as your taxis. But your taxis play more a major role. And then also in your deep rural areas, you then have your light, what they call light vehicles. I can't remember.
Yes.
So I think as a department, we don't ignore rural areas. Rural areas are very important, and therefore, as I have said, it's not only just about roads, it's also about making sure that you offer non-motorized services, you also offer periodic services and other services that may be required.
And there you are. You are going to be getting calls. People are going to be asking for their bicycles. You know, it's that time of the year, Mekibi. It's that time of the year where people are going to take off, going on break, relax. And we cannot complete this program or finish this program without sharing with the listeners the message by our Minister, Dr. Blayton Nzimande, during the launch of the festive season campaign in Limpopo. He said something very profound about the need to observe the rules of the roads, because people don't get involved in accidents because they don't know the rules of the roads. Now let's hear this piece by the minister, recorded by Karabo in Limpopo, talking about the importance of the rules and observation of the rules of the road. I know my colleague.
Conditions, particularly the tires, continue to be one of road crashes. We want to say to our traffic law enforcement officers, continue to check the tires in our cars and be merciless against those who are using tires that are not supposed to be on the road. Also be merciless against what we sometimes call ikorokoro. You know, there is one traffic law enforcement officer, is normally is a traffic reporter in SAPC in KZN. He said, Minister, wherever you speak and there are women, particularly women of the church, please talk to them that, yes, they must pray, but they must stop one prayer in particular. That he thinks that our mothers and sisters must stop praying. Stop praying that, oh Lord, please, why don't you just give my son a skorokoro to drive in? Please don't pray for skorokoros. We don't want skorokoros on our roads.
There you are. Skorokoro, not in our roads. We understand why. And we understand again why people would go for a skorokoro. It has to do with the money. I would suggest that save that money that you wanted to use to buy skorokoro. Keep it safe in the bank. Save again the other money that you are going to get next year. Put it in the bank. I can assure you, take time, invest that money, you will have enough money to buy a reasonable car and you will be safe. Before we bid good night to our listeners, any parting words from you, Makibi?
Just to say thank you also to Mr. Lennox Class, and also to the listeners for the questions that you asked. And also to encourage you to use public transport. It is the only safe mode of transport in South Africa. Thank you.
On that thank you note, we have come to the end of our special broadcast brought to you by the Department of Transport, yes, in collaboration with GCIS.